Welcome to Take a Wander with Shebs. Now, this is a very special edition of the show. I'm going to be talking to a couple of individuals about the current situation in Afghanistan. I felt it was important to discuss this topic as myself, I was interested in traveling to Afghanistan as a tourist, seeing what it was like and seeing the beauty from what I've heard. I spoke to an individual who's in the grounds of Kabul as we speak, and he told me about the last 20 years, what it was like before 2001, and his hope at this moment. The travel professional I spoke to, I wanted to get a perspective on what he felt when he traveled there and what he experienced and what he makes of it right now and his hope as well. I did speak to a family who did flee and a couple of women as well, but unfortunately they didn't want to be shown on camera or be heard. The person I spoke to in the grounds of Afghanistan, he did tell me to protect his identity and change his name, and I will be doing this to protect him from any harm. I also did try and get in touch with a representative of the Taliban and get their perspective, but unfortunately I was unable to get someone to come and speak to me. So let's speak to Masum, who I've changed the name of course, and see what he had to say about the whole situation and what he is going through right now. Thank you very much for coming on the show. I know it's a very difficult time where you are in Afghanistan, so I really appreciate it. Tell us what it's like at this moment where you are in Kabul.
Thank you very much, Sheb. Thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be talking to you. As the world witnessed what has transpired in the past 1 month since August 15 in Afghanistan, it's not pretty here. It doesn't look good. It's absolutely crazy. The Taliban took control of Kabul on August 15 unexpectedly. No one had any idea that this would happen. Even one day before, 24 hours prior to the August 15, on the August 14, the life was normal in Kabul. Nobody had absolutely any idea that such thing would happen. But when we woke up in the morning, of course, there were some rumors circling around that there might be an attack on the capital, but we had absolutely no idea that they will be entering Kabul and they will be taking a full control. But life since then hasn't been easy for almost everyone. As the world saw our youth, our people desperately clinging on to U.S. Air Force planes and then falling off from the sky. That's how the situation was. That's how desperate the people of Afghanistan were to flee the war, to flee the country and finally live somewhere peaceful. But life since then, it hasn't been easy. We are witnessing mass protests all across the countries by women who used to work in ministries, in NGOs, in higher education, university students, school students, women who implemented a vast array of women empowerment projects all across Afghanistan. They don't want to sit at home. They want to raise their voice, not only for themselves, but for the rest of Afghanistan, to make sure that they claim their right. They know their place. The women of Afghanistan, the youth of Afghanistan are not the women and the youth of the 90s that would just let anybody take control and rule this country. We are a democratic, independent country. Afghanistan was and will always be an independent country. Its people love freedom. They love peace. We love each other. We love our neighbors. We don't want war with anybody. But unfortunately, it's imposed upon us. We have been bullied for the last 40 or 50 decades. by everyone. We have been betrayed by our neighbors, by the international community. Around close to $2.3 trillion dollars, was spent. That is a humongous amount of money. $2.3 trillion was spent in Afghanistan since 2001, but we're just seeing that all is left is the Humvees and the tanks of the Americans who are now in control of the Taliban. That's the result of the 20 years of struggle of the youth and women and the academics of Afghanistan, after spending that much amount of money, after losing our soldiers, their lives, sacrificing their lives, their families. Hundreds and thousands of people have lost their lives building this country. And now we're back to square one. Now we're back to on the brink of a civil war, unfortunately, as we can see that a humanitarian crisis is unfolding in the Panjshir province.
I want to know what it was like pre-2001, before the first invasion, what it's been like during the 20 years. And obviously you've explained what it's been like post-August 15th. So just explain to us those time periods between before 2001 and during the 20 years that you were in Afghanistan.
Before 2001, we almost more than 50% of the Afghan population were refugees, as they still are. Many of them in countries like Pakistan, Iran, India, Indonesia, and these places. As a smaller group, of course, in the Europe and America. We were refugees in Pakistan, and we came to Afghanistan in post-2001. We saw that Mr. Hamid Karzai was elected as the president for the interim government, and around 36 to 40 countries and the international community pledged their commitment to the Afghan people. At that time, in the post-2001 era, everybody in the world, the journalists, the human rights defenders, all the political experts and everyone, they just rushed into Afghanistan, and they said that, okay, it's now an independent state. It's now time to build this country. Enough of the civil war, enough of the Russian invasion, enough of all those years in war. Now it's time to build this country from the scratch. Unfortunately, the government at that time in the post-2001 era was also not a very innocent government, I would say, because every time I think about it, I cringe, because the fall of Afghanistan was even predicted at that time. Some people would say that Afghanistan was rising. It was, people were trying very hard. People were finding jobs. The unemployment was being eradicated. Yes, that's true. But people were predicting this day even in 2002, 3, 4, and until 2021, because we knew that this is imminent. This will come. We were constantly invaded. We were constantly bullied, bombed, subjugated to social engineering, robbed, and we have been patronized by our neighbors. We have been patronized by those in power, and finally abandoned. So when we as a youth and the women of Afghanistan, when we talk about what the post-2001 era contributed to the rebuilding of Afghanistan, yes, it did. It significantly changed people's lives. But unfortunately, the lack of commitment from the government at that time was absolutely embarrassing. Their sense of apathy, their corruption, the warlords, they just took control of the power, and everything was disaster. But then when Ashraf Ghani came to power in 2014, he contested the election with Mr. Dr. Abdullah at that time. Then we had some hopes. We thought, okay, this is an educated president. He was a professor at the Stanford University. He wrote dozens of books on how to fix broken states. he might have an idea of how to just once and for all build this country from the scratch. But unfortunately, nothing happened. This small elite circle surrounded President Ghani, who were not that innocent, who were corrupt, who used their power and their position in the government to loot a lot of people. And when all of a sudden the youth and I would call it the woke generation finally realized that there might be something cooking behind the scene, we just said, okay, this is not fair because you have to tell us. Our government owes us an explanation. They should tell us that whether the peace talks in Doha will have a result. The peace talks with Pakistan will have a result. The peace talks, the involvement of the United States will contribute. Unfortunately, no one in the government were ready to tell us the truth, and we were in a total dark. The youth of Afghanistan, we had absolutely no idea what's happening. We would just sit in our offices and discuss. Let's just wait. That's all we can do. We cannot force anyone from the government because, well, that's not how things works in Afghanistan. All you can do is you can just post on social media your concerns or ask your friends to just give you some information about what's going to happen in the next couple of days. But then when we woke up, all of a sudden, we knew that the provinces, one after the other, were collapsing, and Taliban were gaining control. They were seizing. They were seizing a lot of land, provinces, government offices. But then we thought, okay, this had happened for the past 20 years. They might not be able to capture big provinces such as Mazar, Kandahar, Kunduz, or especially the capital, Kabul. But then we went to sleep, and then we woke up on the August 15, and it was boom. It was just the government left, the president fled, his deputies left. Many of them took a lot of money with themselves, and they abandoned us.
From everything that you've told me, the last 20 years, as I've suspected, hasn't been as rosy as what I've heard from people. And I have to say that there's been friends, I've known colleagues who have gone to Afghanistan and have traveled as tourists in the last 20 years. And they've come back to me. And in fact, I spoke to someone recently, and he said Afghanistan, there was a misconception in the Western media. It's not what it seems. It's not what we are told. Their experience of Afghanistan was actually a good experience. So from everything that you've said to me, it seems like there's been a bit of a hindrance with your life, really, in the last 20 years whilst you've been in Afghanistan.
Oh, Sheb, the problem is that, unfortunately, those people are right, because those who traveled to Afghanistan in the past 20 years for just a week or two, they traveled to Salang, they traveled to Panjshir, they ate good food, they had friends to just rent them a place or to invite them to their homes, and we Afghans are known for our hospitality and our tasty food all over the world. Their experience, I would conclude, their experience in just 1 week, seeing a country for just 1 weekend or 2 weeks with your bodyguards, with your armored vehicle, with your digital camera, it's something different. Posing for Instagram pictures or for tweeting for your friends or posting on Snapchat, it's a different story. But when you actually live here, when you actually navigate through life and death on a daily basis, that's another story. Unfortunately, and it somehow amazes me how these diaspora, especially the Afghan diaspora, that I'm really disappointed in many of them, they discovered Afghanistan from their desk sources and from their stories. Many of them, unfortunately, were just armchair critiques. They haven't truly discovered Afghanistan because they had a British or American passport. They came to Afghanistan for a couple of days. His or her father was a minister or a CEO at some company backed by the government. They were provided with security guards, with armored vehicles, with a lot of cash. They would travel to even to the remotest parts of the country, and they would go back to America and Europe and say, well, I just came back from Afghanistan, and everything is rosy. There is absolutely no problem. But unfortunately, their view, their understanding and perspective of Afghanistan was only limited to the food and to the beautiful locations. They didn't really interact with the people of Afghanistan from the ground. People of Afghanistan on the ground who were actually struggling to provide food for their families on the daily basis. I personally know some people who are nowadays, and not only nowadays, but since the past 20, 25 years, have been struggling to earn $2 a day. Even nowadays, even if you find an Afghan in the Kabul city who is earning $1 a day, who is close to like 85 to 90 Afghanis, the currency, that guy would be considered lucky among his peers and his relatives. So my question to this group of people who would just paint a rosy picture that everything was good, America was doing good, the international community was doing good, Pakistan is doing good, India is doing good. No, they were all just, it was a battleground here for all these countries. But Sheb, I'm telling you this, I was on the ground with these people. I have traveled during my work with the NGOs and with the embassies that I've worked with. I have traveled to some of the remotest parts of Afghanistan. I have seen people eating leaves because of hunger. I have seen children die of hunger. So I would like to invite these journalists and these travel bloggers and everyone to come to Afghanistan and contact me, and I will take you to these places, some of the remote parts of the countries, and I will show you the living condition of these people. And I will ask these government officials and the Taliban, the Pakistan, the international community, the opposition, and everyone that where this $2.3 trillion was spent on. What did you guys do? We don't see any results. So unfortunately, now that I'm seeing some of the diaspora, the Afghans in the UK, in the United States, in some other countries, just sitting there tweeting and, we are raising our voice, we are Afghans, we are strong. No, you had the opportunity to build these institutions in the last 20 years. We were looking up to you. You were the generation, the educated generation, the Fulbright, the Chevening generation, the generation who studied in some of the most prestigious universities all over the world. We were expecting from this generation that, okay, our brothers and sisters are now here in Kabul, in Afghanistan. We will support you. You are the educated class. Let's just roll up our sleeves and work for our people. But unfortunately, many of them, they were the first to just ask the Americans to just let them gain access to the airport, and they just left. They were in the front row. Many of these influencers, these Afghan influencers, they just stood in the first row, and they were trying to flee the country on August 15. So my question to those people is, where is your commitment? Even some of our own journalists, prominent journalists who I will share their links with you, they just fled us. I can give you a very good example of some of the very famous and prominent journalists who have very close relations to some people in very high positions all over the world. They just fled the country, and now they're tweeting from Canada, from Abu Dhabi, from America, from London that, you people should go out on the streets and fight with the Taliban. How am I supposed to go out on the street and fight with my fists? I don't even own a knife, and you're asking me to go out and raise my voice against these people. They will just shoot me on the side. I have pictures with me that a lot of these journalists, they were shot, they were brutally harassed, they were detained for hours and for days, and they were investigated. So a lot of this information is unfortunately not going out to the rest of the world. My request to the rest of the world, to the people like you, Sheb, who have access to thousands of people, your followers, your friends, your peers, is that please listen to the people on the ground. Connect with the people who are actually in danger and have been through these traumatic experiences for the past couple of decades. You cannot just count on your source who is sitting in London, who is sitting in New York and LA, and just tweeting from his iPad.
It's gone through so much. And my question to you would be, how can you come out of this with the infrastructure the way it is at the moment? As you said, women aren't getting the opportunities, children, people in departments where their profession, they're not being able to excel. I've spoken to a few people who, as you were saying before, there are sympathizers of the Taliban. Some of them have said actually it's better with the Taliban in than having the Americans in there. So what do you say to those types of people, and have they been sort of almost brainwashed? And you also mentioned you were disappointed with your journalists, your influencers within Afghanistan. I know quite a few sportsmen who are from Afghanistan never really spoke about this. Now, do you also feel as though they weren't able to because of the fear of being punished? What's the solution behind all of this? How can Afghanistan come out of this? There's people like yourself talking to me. Now, I assume that you've taken a risk talking to me actually because you are in the grounds of Afghanistan. So what can be done?
The best thing to do would be that all Afghans, we join forces and we work for the betterment of this country. We work to rebuild our country. We are not privileged enough at the moment to just, to create groups and to create opposition and to blame each other and to risk each other's lives and to kill each other eventually. At the moment, if those sympathizers of the current government, the Islamic Emirate government, are telling you that we are committed to rebuilding Afghanistan and serving the Afghan people, then they should prove it. Then we want proof. Because many youngsters, many youth such as myself have been at home for the past 1 month. There are no jobs, there are no schools, no universities, there are no restaurants open, there is no work, the ATMs are closed, the banks, there are hundreds of people queuing to the banks, and the banks are not giving you more than $200 per week. You're only allowed to withdraw $200 from your account. So if someone is defending this government, that they should explain it to me. How is it possible in the 21st century for a democratic country such as Afghanistan to operate in a government consisted of all the people who 95% of them are above the age of 50? Where is the presence of youth? Where is the share of youth and the women? We don't even have one woman as a representative or as a minister or as a CEO representing any group of people from all across Afghanistan. Not one. So I'm actually really surprised that a youngster from Afghanistan nowadays would say that, okay, this government is good. I'm not defending the past government. I told you earlier, Shep, that the past government was a group of, I would call it a cult. There was a cult of like 5 or 6 people who had monopoly on power, on banks, on everything. They controlled everything, and they were the first to flee the country. I'm not defending the government of Ashraf Ghani because he fled. He was a traitor. He abandoned his people, unfortunately, and his name will go down in the history books as Afghanistan as one of the biggest cowards in the history of Afghanistan because he abandoned his people. He should have stood his ground. He should have defended his people. And our forces should have. He not only betrayed the people of Afghanistan, but he also betrayed our national forces. Now I'm asking these youth, these youngsters who are the sympathizers of the current government that where is the proof? If you're saying that this is the change version of the Taliban, then prove it to us. You cannot just lash women in the public. You cannot just shoot journalists and bloggers and YouTubers and NGO workers. If you're killing people on the road, then how can you expect people to just believe you? It's been 1 month since every single institution in Afghanistan, government institution, is paralyzed. There's absolutely no hope for the youth, for the women, for the elderly, for the children of Afghanistan at the moment. And that's a fact. Yes, I am risking my life giving an interview at this moment to you, Sheb, because I know that it could get me killed. But I love my country, and if I don't speak right now, and then when is the right time to speak? Unfortunately, I just recently got in touch with one of these influencers that I talked about, that I mentioned earlier. He was in Canada, and I asked him that, okay, you had more than 100,000 followers on Twitter and on Instagram. You had a platform. Your job was not to just abandon your people and just flee the country. Your job was to stay here, work for the people, mobilize, regroup, rebel, whatever you call it. Just work for the people, serve your people. You cannot just go and sit in Europe and then just, order the people of Kabul here to just rebel against the Taliban with nothing. How am I supposed to rebel? I don't have the power.
I just want to interject in what you said there. So you said that influencer who had 100,000 Twitter followers and a couple of 100,000, I think you said, on Instagram, you felt as though he abandoned Afghanistan and was telling people of Afghanistan to rebel against the Taliban. Now, one would say, well, he's fled knowing he's trying to save himself and any risk of him possibly getting in danger of potentially dying. But your question to him would be why did you flee when you know you've got the influence, and then tell people to fight for Afghanistan when you could have done it yourself?
I absolutely respect his decision because he was a family man. He fled the country. If I'm also scared for my life. I also want to leave the country. But the difference between my situation and his situation is that I'm nobody. I'm just a normal citizen. He had the backing of more than 100,000 people in Afghanistan. If you're not committed to your country, if you're not a patriot Afghan, then you don't have the right to patronize anybody else. You cannot just, tell people to follow you or to support you or to financially support you or to support your cause, and then you're the first one as a leader to flee. It would be like a commander gathering up his forces, and then as soon as the fight starts, the commander is nowhere to be found. And then the soldiers are just wandering all over the place and have absolutely no idea where our leader is. This is why, Sheba, I'm saying that when someone is trying to be an influential, when someone decides to be anyone, a social media personality, a journalist, a politician, a minister, a president, they have a duty. They have a duty from every perspective, from the Islamic perspective, from the social perspective, from every world perspective. It's their duty to stick by their people until the end.
As I said to you earlier, some of my friends, colleagues, journalists who have traveled to Afghanistan have said what a beautiful country it is. but perhaps they didn't see the side that you've just described to me and described to all of us. My only hope and only prayers is that you're safe. People have listened to your story. Let's just hope that there's no other battles, there's no civil wars. As you said, there potentially could be.
Afghanistan is such a beautiful country, and I think the reason sometimes I tell my friends and families that the reason that it was betrayed is because it's such a beautiful country with such a beautiful people. We are very diverse ethnic, 14 or 15 ethnic groups living in Afghanistan, diverse, rich culture. It's such a wonderful, beautiful country, every part of Afghanistan. But unfortunately, nobody is letting us live in peace. We are a nomadic, middle, lower class, but very, very hospitable, very educated, good people in Afghanistan.
I wish you the best of luck, and thank you very much for telling me your story.
Thank you very much, Sheb.
That was Masum, and he told me his story there. As I said to you earlier, I changed his name to protect his identity. I'm going to be speaking to Shane Dallas now, who is a travel professional who has travelled to Afghanistan, what he made of the country and what he thinks of it all right now. So let's have a listen. What I want to ask you about is your perception before you went to Afghanistan, and whilst you were there, what were your thoughts, and what are your thoughts now on what you see?
Okay, so before I went to Afghanistan, I had obviously done research, and whenever you go into a place which has the potential to be volatile, which Afghanistan is, it can change very quickly, as we have seen, you need to do your research. So I did a lot of research east of the country, and all the reports I was reading was that the infrastructure is not great, which is true, that it's incredibly friendly and the hospitality is wonderful, and that it's an amazing destination with beautiful mountains. And the thing I remember most was the beautiful mountains. I had a friend who visited in the 70s, and he said it was the most beautiful country he'd seen, and that was really my motivation. So when I had an opportunity, I went there. When I went there, the hospitality, and it's really interesting, I love cricket, and I think I may have mentioned this before, and the Afghanistan team, their home base, Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates, and I remember going there to a cricket matches, and the Afghans I met would say, "Oh, next time you come to Sharjah, stay at my place." And that mentality is what I found in Afghanistan. I was a bit nervous. There's no question. If you don't have nerves, you're probably not alert and aware of your surroundings. So I was nervous. When I got there, I mean, it was one of the most influential countries in my life I've ever visited. One thing I noticed that was very strong was almost the entire absence of women in the street. So there, in the rural areas, I found that I was not served by one woman in a shop. None of the the homestays I stayed at, or the little guest houses. I was never served by one woman. The only women I saw working were in the fields and farms. But in terms of retail, shops, nothing. Women weren't allowed to leave the home without permission. And when they did, they had to, if they left with the man, the husband or the brother, they always walked behind them. So remember, is the man was walking in front, and his wife, who was obviously a bit shorter, was behind in the full, the metallic blue burqa. And walking behind her, was their daughter, who probably just reached puberty, maybe 12 or 13. And this is the only time you saw the women. Sometimes they go out in twos, but it was, even my guide I spoke to, and I said to him, what's it, about his family? And he says, "Oh no, my wife never leaves the home." This was considered quite normal there. So that was one thing. The other thing with Afghanistan is the infrastructure wasn't good where I was. I remember the road I had to travel. You'd be lucky to average 20 kilometres an hour, and that was the main road in the region. Really tough. The villages are very small because of to sustain the people. It's a very harsh environment in winter. In summer, it's a lot better. I was there just on the cusp of summer. Villages, 150 people. That seemed about the average, maybe 200, and that was it. And so you have very close-knit communities in these areas that work together. Medical facilities were very sparse. So if you had a serious medical issue, that's one of the reasons mortality rates were so high. I mean, they could be really high, 25, 30% higher, because there's no medical facilities in some of these areas. And that is changing. There is some change in that area, but wonderfully hospitable. Even visited a school, went past and in the vehicle. It was rare to see any vehicles, and all of a sudden all these children, hey, typical, as you see in a lot of the world. And I said, come, let's go back and have a look. Went in there, and it was a co-ed school, boys and girls, but I'd say between 90 and 95% of the students were boys in this primary school. And that was the rule. Because I was a man, I had almost no interaction with any women whatsoever. And that delineation was probably best shown by an incident. And a young guy came up to me, he was probably late teens, early 20s, and he said, what do you think of Afghan women? And I said to him, I don't know, I haven't met any, I never see them. And just as we said that, one of the burqa-covered women walked past us. She was alone, and her burqa flowed out behind her, and he nudged me and said, isn't she beautiful? And that's a very different concept to beauty to what I had. And I said, why do you find it beautiful? And kind of couldn't really explain it that well. But the thing is, I found all the preconceptions I had of Afghanistan were rendered minimal by the time I went there, because it was far more complex than I was led to believe. And I was more confused about the state of Afghanistan and societal and other expectations than I was before I arrived. And I left them thinking, how could you possibly summarize this country in a few sentences? It's just not possible.
I'm interested in knowing what time you went. So we all know 2001 was when the invasion happened. So the people I've spoken to in the grounds of Afghanistan have said Western society who have traveled there, and one of the guys I spoke to who said journalists within Afghanistan, influencers, you mentioned travel bloggers, didn't necessarily show the Afghanistan that he had seen. And he said he was a very educated individual. I've spoken to some women who have not wanted to be on camera, but they've said, you were explaining there, they don't really have the chance to progress in education, in a career. When you went, and the time that you went, did you? I know you said you noticed a little bit about that, but was your aim to sort of show the beauty rather than the horrors? Because that is one. Well, everyone that I've spoken to has said that wasn't put out to the world. So if people knew about it, they would have spoken about it and said, hang on, this is not going to look good once everything is over. Would that be fair to say, or what's your perception of that?
Okay, so I went mid-2013. Okay, mid-2013 I was there. But my experiences there, I've spoken to other people who went there, and they saw pretty much the same thing as well. I travel to experience and to learn and to understand. I don't go particularly to say, here's all the beauty or here's the horrors. I mean, there are some cases I've been to where it is impossible to avoid the horrors, such as Rwanda, the genocide memorials in Rwanda. They are incredibly powerful and disturbing places, and one has to mention them. In Afghanistan, I was there. I wrote about it at the time, just reporting on what I see. Either way, and when I travel, I see plenty of things. Whether I agree or disagree with them is irrelevant. I just tell what I see. I'm a positive person, so I tend to focus on the positive. People who know me, I'm a very positive person. So I'll focus on hospitality and the food and the incredible natural beauty, and it is still the most beautiful country I've seen. So my friend who visited in the 70s was absolutely correct. So I'll focus on that. I don't go to comment on societal or cultural issues, because even there, it will give me an awareness. It will give me an awareness of the complexities around me, and that's what I found, that it was far more complex than what I previously imagined. But full understanding, there's no way, even spending months there, you'd have trouble getting a full understanding of the complexities. I mean, I live in Kenya and I've been here for years, and even after years, there are still things I'm learning. It is, and Afghanistan, I think, is a very complex country.
As we know, I travel, you travel as well. One of the things we might not necessarily see, because if you've lived in a place for a long time, or if you've lived there forever, you're always going to get a different angles. So I'll give you an example. When I've traveled to places like Cambodia, I saw, well, you can't again escape the genocide that happened there, but you don't know exactly what those people went through. So question to you is, as travel journalists, travel bloggers, travel influencers, or people who are in the media, do you feel as though the travel industry hasn't tackled these sort of issues? Maybe talk about it a bit more. Do you think that there needs to be a shift in that?
I actually don't. And the reason I don't, these countries where people tend to comment on, they tend to comment on countries where they don't fully understand. And the only way to fully understand is to spend a lot of time there. And also be aware, and particularly in places such as Middle East and Africa, a foreigner, especially a white foreigner, commenting on internal issues it just reminds them too much of the colonialist time. It's considered quite offensive for that to occur. And so therefore, I would say, to be respectful, you observe, you ask. It's good to ask questions and learn, but then to become an advocate, I think that becomes very difficult to do, because unless you have had time there, you don't have perspective. And even if so when you spend a little time in a place, you get an awareness and some perspective, but to get an understanding, to really speak with knowledge on an issue, you need a significant amount of time. And I used to do this early on. I used to comment on places I traveled, but the longer I traveled, I realized I actually had very little understanding of the places I was traveling to, so I don't comment anymore, because I've seen too many instances of this where people comment about countries they haven't visited, acting like they know what's happening where they don't. And I've been to places like Afghanistan. There's no way I could comment on the complexities of the society, and I've been there, let alone someone who hasn't visited. And also, and the one thing again I say, I know in quite a lot of countries, it's bordering on the offensive to be commenting on this is how you should do things within a country. Within a European context, I'm Australian. Foreigners can talk about Australia and say, you should be doing this, you should be doing this. And an Aussie will go, oh, yeah, okay, mate, that's okay. And we'll take it. But in a lot of countries, that is considered offensive. And I remember being in a country, and I'm not going to mention it, was in Africa, and I was sitting, and it was a rarely visited country, not a properly visited country. And I was sitting, there was another tourist next to me, and there was a few locals. It was all men, and we were all sitting chatting. And this guy happened to mention that he went to one accommodation. It wasn't great. It was just kind of middle, right? So he said, it was the toilet didn't work well and whatever. And he left. And the locals who were at the table were really offended that this person even thought something average of one of the places in their country. So you've got to be aware that if you are going to comment, that there's a lot of local sensitivities that you can be stepping on when you commenting. Your intentions may be good, but and there will be people, even if they agree with your sensitivities, will they may agree with what you're saying, but they don't want to hear it from a foreigner. They don't want to hear it from an outsider. It's our problem. Let us handle it. And that is a very common thing I've heard in a lot of countries around the world that are, let's say, not Western economies.
What would you say to those that I've spoken to have said, as journalists within the country when we visit, we should have done more? What would you say to this type? What would you say to them?
I told it exactly like it was when I was there. I said that I hardly saw women. I saw there was a school and it was mostly mostly boys, this is stuff I've said, and it's not saying it with a critical eye. It's not saying and condemning it. It's just giving a matter of facts. And it's same with I went to North Korea. It's very easy, and I've seen this done many times, to talk about North Korea and point it from a very negative view from someone visiting the country. All I did was report on what I saw. That is up for the reader to decide whether that's a good or bad thing. That's not for me to make a judgment call. That's not for me to make a judgment on the benefits or the detriments on their country. Should more people have reported accurately? That is true, and I think they should have. But the fact is, very few people travel to Afghanistan. It's one of the least touristed places on earth, and therefore you have a very small number of people talking about the country. And anyone who's been there will have into rural areas. I never went to Kabul, and Kabul is very different. And the reason I say that, it's very different. A big capital city to the rural area. It's like comparing London with, say, rural Yorkshire, or the US comparing New York with the Bible Belt. You cannot compare it. So I can't comment on Kabul. I can't comment. But what I saw were the rural areas, and women had a very limited role in society there. Very, very limited. And if you want an idea, have a look at the World Bank and have a look at tertiary rates for men and women in the country. And men, in the provinces, 34 provinces, they will show you that the participation rate is 15, 18, 20, 25, 30, around that percentage. In that percentage, you look at women's rates, and it's down. A lot of the provinces are 2, 3, 4, 5. And that is pretty much what the information's out there. It's a matter that it didn't get the publicity before. And now that there's been a change and there's a new government, suddenly it's getting a lot of publicity, where, in fact, I think quite a few of the circumstances haven't changed from what I see. What I'm seeing people complaining about now is what I saw when I was there in 2013. And this was an area that was rural. And it was an area at the time that didn't have any affiliations really to kind of any outside groups as such. So it's deeply conservative, and there's a strong societal and cultural influences there that have resulted in what we see very low participation rates of women in tertiary education, according to the World Bank. And the fact is that even in places that were extremely welcoming and friendly to me, women weren't allowed out of their home without permission. And that's just the reality of the place. But there were so few people who went, that message is not going to get out there as much. Now that people are focusing, they're discovering it. But a lot of this was there before.
What hope do you have for Afghanistan? And do you ever see yourself going back if things pick up?
I would go back, not now. I think it's too uncertain at the moment. We are seeing different signals. Yeah, I'd consider it. And it's impossible to say now, because I can't predict. Who would have said 6 months ago, say in early July, who would have said that Kabul would have fallen to the Taliban? You couldn't. So it's impossible to predict that far in advance. If the circumstances are right, would I return? I would, because it's one of my favourite countries I've visited. There's some places I definitely wanted to visit that I missed. But it's just too early to tell. And only time will tell here. Only time will tell.
So, Shane, thank you very much for telling us about your experience. I really appreciate it. And I'll speak to you very soon.
Thank you very much.
That was Shane Dallas and his perspective and his experiences on Afghanistan. Now, I did say earlier I spoke to a family and a few women as well. Now, they didn't want to come on the show because they wanted to protect their identity. Now, the family I spoke to have fled Afghanistan and they're safe in Europe. They did say it was devastating to see what they saw. They were worried about their safety and they are just happy to have gotten away. The women I spoke to as well, they did tell me that over the last 20 years, they've been treated as second-class citizens. Opportunities have never been there, and what you're seeing now is something that's been going on for years. I want to finish off by saying, as a travel professional, For me, it is essential to tell the whole story wherever you travel to, as it could be pivotal in someone's life. Perhaps if there were more visitors to Afghanistan over the years and stories like Masum's made it into the Western media, it could be a different scenario for him and many other Afghans who are terrified for their lives. I will also touch on what Masum said about his fellow Afghans wanting him to fight against the Taliban. This has been echoed by some of our politicians and political commentators here in the UK. Some of them who all year have been petrified of footballers taking the knee as they felt it was a sign of Marxists taking over the country. Perhaps they don't realise how lucky they are. My hope for Afghanistan and the people is that there is a resolution and I can travel there in the near future. That's it for Take a One Those Shebs. Hope to see you all very soon. Until next time, bye for now.